Hello and welcome back to the Roundup by News of the Week, the show where I, Jake Whitwell, summarise and explain the news, helping you to stay informed. With that in mind, I've been working on the categories again, so they've changed a little bit as well, trying to reduce the amount of uncategorised news that I put into this. It should help with your understanding a little bit. But that's enough waffling from me about nothing in particular. We'll go on to the news now. The Times covered small business reaction to the Workers' Rights Bill, and they say it will bring havoc to the UK economy. The Federation of Small Businesses have conducted a research on job openings in the last few months and found that in the final 3 months of 2024, 32% of small businesses said they would cut staff. That was up from the 17% who said they would in the 3 months before, so the quarter before. They also found that 51% of companies have cited labour costs as their biggest barrier to growth, which explains some of the cuts in terms of staff numbers. Due to this, the Federation have called on Starmer to show he gets the importance of creating growth and sustaining jobs by walking back his legislation on workers' rights. Tina McKenzie, the chairwoman of the association, said that the plans to allow employees to sue their bosses on day one of work would create havoc, and that relates to the parts of the bill that are aiming to strengthen workers' rights against unfair dismissals, which it would do for that, but it seems it would also cost businesses. The plans will bring damage to an economy that's already fragile. And she mentioned other areas of the bill as well, like the changes to statutory sick pay, which would possibly suppress hiring. Sky News noted a Senate committee has warned against making lying in politics a criminal offence. Her plans were put in place by Plaid Cymru last year as means to restore trust in politicians, which is fundamentally what we all want. At the time, there were reportedly concerns for parliamentary privilege. They were worried about how banning lying might affect the exemption of politicians to things like slander and libel. After their findings, the report by the committee basically concluded saying lying in Parliament shouldn't be banned, even lying on purpose. Trust in politicians. The committee said that the risks and unintended consequences, like maybe the risks to parliamentary privilege, outweigh the benefits that could be gained by untangibly raising trust in politicians. There were also concerns over putting excess strain on the judiciary and infringing on the freedom of expression of some people under the ECHR. Also, the idea of proving someone's statement as false was apparently a concern for the committee. They instead recommended that the government should strengthen the existing standards of practice by explicitly stating that members should not make misleading statements, and then you could go after them politically for their breaking of standard. You're not actually charging people legally, you're just politically saying you're not meeting the standards reflective of a House member, blah, 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 getting rid of them on that basis. The Times covered farmers' action to the government's tax plans. We've seen a lot of this over the last few months, and basically the president of the NFU, Tom Bradshaw, proposed a counter-solution to the Treasury earlier on this week, or last week now, whoopsie. He and others suggested that there should be a change to how the law would work, meaning that farmers would only be charged this upper level of inheritance tax if they went on to sell their inherited farms within a few years of inheriting them. In theory, you might see how this is fair. It would solve the issue of farmers being worried about losing their farms just because their parents have died, and it would also maybe fix the Treasury's need for money, because if they wanted to sell the farms, they would not be escaping tax. It would be like a win-win solution. The Treasury didn't see that as though. The plans were rejected. They were reportedly also not considered by the Treasury either. Bradshaw argued that the policy flies in the face of good taxation, and that there haven't been models done to assess whether farmers can cope with the inheritance taxes or not. Research by the Lib Dems outlined how, precarious the financial situation for farmers in this country is. They found that 1 in 4 farms have closed in the last 2 decades. That's around 50,000 livestock farms and around 30,000 crop farms. So we're seeing farms disappearing at quite a large rate. Tim Farron, the Lib Dems environment spokesperson, said the government was throwing the farmers to the wolves, although he didn't actually mention about this government specifically. It was more about successive governments throwing farmers to the wolves. Bradshaw said the reaction from the NFU members will likely be one of fury, and obviously this comes amid the protests we've seen over the last few months, with farmers storming places with their tractors, and after a petition achieved 275,000 signatures calling for the bill to be struck down. Sky News detailed the early release of prisoners in Scotland has begun. Under the provision of the Prisoners Early Release Act, prisoners who have served 40% of their sentence and hit certain criteria will be released. That is up from the previous 50%, or down from the previous 50%, and it means more prisoners earlier on in their sentence are now being released. As within England, domestic abuse and sexual offences convictions. People convicted of domestic abuse and sexual offences will be excluded from the scheme. It will come in different phases. The first phase took place this week, which is why we're hearing about it. The second phase will take place in like mid-March, early March, and then the third phase will take place in late March. A total of between 290 and 390 inmates will be released overall. The Scottish Government have said this will result in a reduction in the prison population by 5% in the long term. But the Justice Secretary has acknowledged it isn't the complete solution, but she said it will serve to allow the prisons to return to normal functioning. But there have been concerns over the victim notification service's ability to handle the releases, as it failed to notify the victims of the release of prisoners in the summer. The Mirror noted the Transport Secretary has said that the state-owned GBR, Great British Railways, will be set up by 2027. Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander has told officials she expects the railway to be open by 2027. She explained that it would take longer for the legislation to be passed as it was a statutory change, and that they would also be setting up an independent watchdog. Currently, there's a consultancy running which also adds to the time, and the Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham said that praised the changes, saying that he's looking forward to help shaping the bill as it develops. The Independent detailed the Home Office has admitted migrant hotels will be used for 4 more years, despite a pledge being made to close them down. The Independent covered comments from the Permanent Secretary to the Home Office, who they suggested said ups and downs would affect the promise to end the use of hotels to house asylum seekers. So far since coming into power, Labour have actually opened 7 new hotels. They then closed 2 of those hotels. Last October, the number was 220. It was now 218, up from 213 when they came into power. And this sort of up and down dipping motion reflects Matthew Rycroft's actual comments, where he said that although people might want to see that sort of gradual slope, it will be more like ups and downs. I don't know why it'll be more like ups and downs. Anyway, Sky News noted increasing defence spending will mean the government has to break promises elsewhere. Amid international pressure, mainly from America, and what is probably growing insecurity in the world, in the Middle East and in Ukraine, Starmer spoke at a summit in Paris, urging NATO partners to raise the defence spending in line, or reinforcing the calls that Donald Trump has made in America. Despite spending above NATO's 2% commitment at 2.3%, Labour have committed to raising their defence spending to 2.5% when it's financially doable, or whatever the actual wording was. That planned increase to 2.5% of the GDP would cost between 5 to 6 billion. An increase of 3% would. But experts are warning that 2.5% increase won't meet military officials' targets. So an increase of 3% would cost £20 billion, and the 5% Donald Trump wants to see would cost around £80 billion. Given that Labour pledged not to tax working people, they have said they will not go back to tax businesses, and they have committed to spending on public services, any increase will be difficult to fit into their spending plans. So after changing the debt rules already, there is limited room to do it again. So that makes things even more difficult, like Sky said. The Independent detailed the government has unveiled plans to reform clean energy to speed up the green energy transition. The government has unveiled its Contracts for Difference, its CFD scheme. The scheme would see developers bid for secured prices. So the delivery of energy would be less risky, or the investment in this area will be less risky than other investments because of that fixed rate. This is currently under consultation, and as it is a consultation, aspects of the scheme like the eligibility criteria of which businesses can get on board, the planning regulations and the budgets, the budgets and the length of this scheme are all up for feedback. Right. In news on foreign policy, the Telegraph reported JD Vance will likely raise issues of free speech with Starmer during his Washington visit, which is coming now this week. The Vice President of the US said this week that the invasion of free speech and mass migration are greater concerns to Europe than the invasion of Russia to Ukraine. He said in his speech that he singled out the UK specifically, where he felt voters had been betrayed by their politicians. He usually noted this protection is a shared characteristic between the UK and the USA, and that Trump's team takes a different view to that shared characteristic than Biden's team did, putting more emphasis on the protection of it, most likely. He said he didn't want to attack any one country over this. It wasn't an attack, it was more just an observation by the looks of it from his point of view. ITV News noted the Defence Secretary is set to meet his Norwegian counterpart amid the security turmoil in Europe. With tensions rising and states being alienated from peace talks between the USA and Russia, John Healey will meet with Tor Sandvik from Norway to discuss steps to ramp up defence spending. That's after he met with Pete Hegseth, the US Defence Secretary, and defended European states, saying that they were looking at ramping up their defence spending as well. The Times detailed Starmer as risked Macron's fury by ruling out funds to help global hunger. Starmer has said his government will not commit to more payments to the international fund set up by Britain in 2012. This is despite the Conservatives promising to sustain investment in 2022. It was also not just sustained, it was more investment. I think it was more or near enough double. We're talking billions of pounds being invested. Apparently this decision shocked Macron's team, and one person said it made them mysteriously unhappy. The lack of commitment comes amid significant financial pressure on the UK, with this type of spending being considered unprotected and therefore at the behest of the Treasury and spending reviews. Looking at other aspects of politics, the Telegraph reported Liz Truss has called for the Tories to form a pact with Reform UK. She called for the very best of Reform to get together with the very best of the Tories in a pact she seemed to think public pressure wanted to bring about. She said that politically the 121 MPs in the Commons might not support this, as they aren't radical enough. She called for changes like leaving the ECHR, repealing the Human Rights Act, and she also talked about making the Bank of England more accountable, as well as the judiciary. She, as the former PM, is the most significant Tory figure to embrace these calls for a pact to reform UK. She joins the ranks of people like Suella Braverman and Priti Patel in doing it. This might be a bit of a stumbling block for Truss, though, as both Badenoch and Reform and Nigel Farage have said that they want to, not form a pact. This comes from Reform currently leading the Tories in the polls, and the newer party are enjoying increasing membership rates as well. They're currently around 200,000 members, which is 69,000 more than the Conservatives. The Guardian noted more than 900 Labour figures have decried the party's stance on migration and their asylum policies. Last week in the roundup, we covered Labour's migration plans, which would make it the policy of the Home Office to refuse citizenship to those who arrive via channel crossings and dangerous journeys, like the small boat crossings. It had backlash at that point from charities and pressure groups, but the uproar has now grown to Labour members. A group of 900 Labour members and trade unionists, including MPs and peers, have come together and accused the government of mimicking the performative politics the Tories engaged with at the general election. They also said this is especially dangerous as it fuels the rise of Reform UK. Politics Home reported that the British public opposed tax hikes to increase defence spending, according to a poll by YouGov. So a YouGov poll which surveyed more than 7,000 UK adults found around 55% of them would oppose tax raises. When asked specifically about tax raises to fund defence spending increases, 30% of people said they would strongly oppose it, while 25% of people said they would be slightly opposed to the measures. Conversely, 30% of people overall said they would support the tax rises, meaning the majority of people wouldn't or weren't sure. In news on trade and other news, which is sort of political, my bad, I'll try not to bore you with it. Sky News cover comments from the monitoring company Tell Mama, which said it's the most dangerous time to be a Muslim in the United Kingdom. Tell Mama tracks anti-Muslim hatred and revealed that 5,837 and revealed there were and they revealed that there were 5,837 reports of anti-Muslim hatred in 2024. That's the most in a single year they've recorded. This is more than 2,000 higher than it was in 2023, and they've noted that Islamophobic assaults surged last year with a 73% increase on 2023 as well. The Times noted 3 million people claim benefits with no obligation to seek work. This 3 million figure is double the recorded number 3 years ago, and that's despite the number of people on universal credit looking for work staying the same. So it's only this non-looking for work category that's ballooned. It has been reported by the Times that there were plans to require people in that category to resume their search for work in order to fill the 800,000 vacancies in the economy. Part of these plans are also said to involve abolishing that category of universal credits where people are designated to have a limited capacity to work. The Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall said too many people are shut out of work with no support. The Independent noted Starmer has condemned Farage's dangerous right-wing politics as Reform are surging in the polls. Techne's weekly tracker for popularity noted Reform UK have 26% of the popular vote. That is more than Labour and the Conservatives achieved in their weekly tracker. In response, in the lead up to local elections in Scotland, Keir Starmer is expected to slam down Reform UK's policies and calling them not for the workers and telling Scotland Farage is not the answer for them. A spokesperson for Reform Scotland said that in reality, Starmer is failing Scotland and that they need reform. In news on economics, The Standard noted Rachel Reeves has been accused of being out of her depth as inflation rises to 3%. So this week, inflation rose to 3%, which is higher than the 2.8% forecasted by the City of London. This is due to spending on public services like wage rises for union members and taxes on private school fees, according to experts. This means that the costs of food and goods will rise to consumers and pile more pressure on Reeves, who is already under fire. The Guardian detailed Irish figures have shown a £6 billion drop in trade with Britain. Ireland's General Statistics Office have found the value of imported and exported goods between the nations fell from 38 billion to 32 billion in 2024. There was a 3 billion euro economic drop in chemical exports and a 1.6 billion drop in the export of gas. The volume gas and lubricants. The volume of gas imported also fell by 1.2 billion, and the Guardian said red tape from the Brexit deal led to a reducing trade in other areas like food too. The Independent reported Rachel Reeves wanted to find the right balance in her proposed changes to cash ISA and deposit limits. Rachel Reeves, she wanted to find the balance between encouraging saving and investing. She's been suggested that she will potentially lower the tax-free investment limit from £4,000 from £20,000. It historically was only £3,000 before 2018. Reeves said she wanted the changes to create better returns for savers, but Tom Shelby, the Director of Policy at AJ Bell, said it was hard to imagine an ISA system which would not let investors save a lot of cash on side as well. He also said that changes might be superficial as there's no guarantee these savings will translate into long-term investments, and other groups like Building Societies warned that the Building Societies Association warned that this would only push up lending, that this would restrict lending and push up mortgage figures. In global news, Sky News noted protesters gathered in Berlin ahead of the election late last week. Sky News article featured a video which I won't show. I don't think I'm allowed to show, and I won't because lawyers are scary. Aside from that, they detailed that protests in Germany were over the firewall pact between political parties which opposed the AfD, and it would stop them entering power. ITV News covered comments by Macron, who labelled the French knife attack a terror attack. The prosecutor's office noted a 37-year-old Algerian man was arrested after the knife attack left one person dead and 2 people injured. The attack was at a market in Mulhouse in France, and the reason the president gave for believing it was a terrorist attack was due to the attacker's words during the attack. This apparently left him in no doubt. There's been a lot of news regarding Ukraine this week, so I'll try and sum it up. Reuters reported the Trump administration could seek to strike a simplified mineral deal with Ukraine, and then a more detailed one later on. Ukraine rejected a deal which would see the USA receive more than 50% of Ukraine's critical minerals. Trump reportedly wanted his deal in place before he brokered a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, and this comes as Trump also called Zelensky a dictator without elections. The Independent noted Putin has praised the Russia and US talks and said that Ukraine will not be excluded from negotiations. So early last week, European nations and also Ukraine were left out from the initial talks. It's been claimed this was not the case by Putin. He also praised the work of Trump and said he looked forward to the sort of frank conversations he would have with him when he was last elected. AFP News covered the Ukrainian reaction and noted Ukrainians have reaction twice with disbelief and anger at the talks which took place in the early part of last week. A Ukrainian soldier blaming Ukraine for the war would be some kind of absurdity which they cannot understand. The Independent covered the British reaction to the Ukrainian war, with the Defence Secretary Healey saying that we must not jeopardise peace. Healey wanted to remain focused on the war rather than the peace talks and wanted to heap the maximum pressure on Putin. He said, when asked about Trump's claim that Ukraine started the war, that 3 years ago one nation invaded another, and since then the Ukrainians have been fighting for their freedom. The Hill covered Trudeau's reaction. Trudeau said on social media that Canada and our allies are unequivocal in standing up against Vladimir Putin's illegal, immoral, and unjust violations of the international order. He furthered this by saying Canada will always stand up for Ukraine, and that's the gist of what I got for this week on the Ukrainian news. In non-political news, BBC News detailed greyhound racing is set to be banned in Wales. The Welsh Government said greyhound racing will be banned as soon as it is practically possible in the region, after the prospect of a ban received cross-party support and was backed by a petition with 35,000 signatures. The RSPCA said it would protect dogs from the inherent risks of competitive racing, and other organisations like the Dogs Trust praised the measure. However, the Greyhound Board of Great Britain said that the change had nothing to do with patient welfare, and in any case the change won't come in for a while, at least until the next Parliament. Sky News noted Luis Rubiales has been found guilty of sexual assault after kissing Jenny Hermoso without consent after the Women's World Cup final. After being found guilty of kissing the Spanish women's team's all-time top scorer, Rubiales has been fined €10,000. He was, however, acquitted of coercion. There has been some discourse over whether the punishment was too light from campaigners and also Hermoso's teammates. Sky News covered a train crash from Manchester where a 3-year-old girl died as well. A tram crash with a van on Mosley Street in Manchester resulted in the girl in question, a pedestrian, not travelling in either of the vehicles, dying. Officers attended the scene, but no arrests were made, and obviously the crash caused a lot of disruption in Manchester as well. The Independent detailed Pope Francis is in critical condition, and the 88-year-old Pope has been in the hospital for a week with a lung condition. His health deteriorated over the weekend, and that put him in critical condition. Since then, and I'm cheating with this because, well, it's happened today on Monday, we know the Pope remains in critical condition and seems to have suffered a kidney failure. But anyway, that concluded the news I got for this week. Thank you very much for listening to the roundup and dealing with me, as even though it's been delayed. See you next week. Bye.